and very happy and honored to have this opportunity to speak from under the virtual Bodhi tree, since physical travel is not possible at this time. But this month of May is the time where within the Southern Buddhist tradition we recognize that the birth of the Bodhisattva and the Enlightenment, and then the Parinibbana, the final passing away of the Buddha, all occurred on the full moon day of May in those respective years of his life. So this is a festival month for us. And so that we're still a couple of weeks away. Today is just before the new moon. So in 2 weeks' time before the full moon actually arrives. I appreciated this invitation, opportunity from Dharma College, and one more to be offering some Dharma reflections in the occasion of the Visakha month, and to be celebrating the Enlightenment, the birth, the Enlightenment, and the final passing away of the Buddha. So I'll begin in our traditional way by reciting the Namo Tassa 3 times. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. First of all, I must ask, can everybody hear me okay? So I see heads nodding, thumbs up, thank you, very good. So one of the aspects of this pandemic is it both separates us. We can't all be gathered together in Bodh Gaya, which would be a lovely thing to be able to do, to be at the place of the Buddha's enlightenment. But, and so there's a lot of the consequences of physical separation that many people are experiencing, not just those gathered here, of course, but many thousands, millions of people around the world. But the advances in technology, as we have right here now, this Zoom program that we're using in a mysterious way also brings us together, so that there's a strange blend of both separation and confluence that comes about through the pandemic. Many of you wouldn't be able to travel to Bodh Gaya, maybe wouldn't have the possibility or the interest to go all the way to India just to be listening to a Dhamma talk. But the accessibility that we have nowadays through our devices is, I feel, is a wonderful, skillful means. And so I'm very grateful for this opportunity whereby we can at least virtually gather together and to reflect on the teachings and to use our ability to look at our life, our mind, and look at the world around us to better understand how we work, how the world works, and through that understanding to come to a quality of clarity within ourselves, and also a quality of attunement to the living situation that we're a part of, and thereby we're able to take action, to speak and to act in ways that are of direct benefit to ourselves and to those around us. So I felt that was the spirit in which to offer teachings today, and to reflect on these kind of aspects of the Buddha's teaching and this particular question, or theme, radiant mind, overcoming the shadows of fear. Oh, reflecting on this title, first of all, I'm bringing to mind the terrible ravages of the COVID-19 in India. Right now, it's sort of rampaging through the country, and many thousands, millions of people have been affected, and there are thousands and thousands of people dying each day from the disease, and the medical services, social services, or families at full stretch trying to cope with the impact of the illness, along with the other difficulties of life that we experience, or particularly in Mother India, how difficult and challenging the situation is. And so the feelings of fear, of despair, different kind of mental states are brought about being in the midst of that kind of physical devastation, emotional devastation. So that I didn't come up with the title myself. This was suggested by Dharma College, but I felt it was very, very appropriate because in the middle of a pandemic like this in the UK, it's abating at the moment. The levels of infection and number of deaths per day from the illness are diminishing, and but India is very far from that case. And other countries, the USA still has the largest number of infections and deaths, I believe, from all around the world. So the United States, and I can recognize many faces from the USA on my screen, that you there in the US are also, in the middle of this sort of rampaging pandemic. And when I lived in Redwood Valley up in Northern California, there was occasional forest fires in the area. And recently, since I moved to England a couple of years ago, there were really massively devastating fires, even in Redwood Valley, the village, right up close, literally to the borders of the monastery, with the fire right close by. And that sense of fear and say the impact of that instability, of the unpredictability. Are we going to survive? What's going to be here tomorrow? Are we going to make it? Are we not going to make it? It is absolutely real. And so that in reflecting on these themes, that was one of the images that came to mind, was being in the midst of a raging forest fire. And how do we work with that? How do we handle that? What are the appropriate responses? And reflecting on this, when any of us, not just with the COVID-19 or forest fires, but the different things in our life, when we are experiencing these kinds of massive physical and emotional threat to our well-being and the well-being of those around us, there's a number of different ways that we react, and what we find in the Pali scriptures, in the Buddha's teaching, he described as the agati, or these mental obstructions or challenges that come to mind. One of them is fear, bhaya. Abhayagiri means fearless mountain. So bhaya, B-H-A-Y-A, bhaya is fear. So that is one of the qualities that comes to mind. Also, moha, delusion, the mind caught up in the kind of questions like, why is this happening? What does this mean? Or also that quality of moha, which leads to just a switching off, a shutting down, just kind of ignoring, just going numb. Also the aspect of moha or delusion, which is say based around just depression and despair, qualities of sadness, domanassa, just getting drawn into a whirlpool of hopelessness and such like. Then there's anger, blaming, and blaming the government policies, or the various forces around us, finding fault and getting angry, getting enraged, and getting caught into blame. So that's dosa. That is another of the agati. And then raga, I would say the last one is passion, is just getting distracted, finding something to fill our mind with, to get away from the impact of the threat, just to put our mind onto something else that will be other, so just to fill the mind with some kind of distracting, pleasant alternative. So this is what came to mind when thinking in terms of these shadows of fear, these different biases. The agati is a mental bias, and that's when there's say, a reactive, unawakened mental, say, habit in the face of these kind of difficulties, whether it's the COVID pandemic or whether it's the other challenges that we have in our lives. So going towards, let's say, fear, delusion, aversion, or towards passion or desire. That's where the mind adverts. Well, so that so I'll look into and talk about, offer a few reflections on those areas in a moment. But first of all, one of the things I thought I'd like to talk about in terms of fear is that, like we're using a phrase like the shadows of fear. So we might feel like, I don't want to experience fear, or yeah, fear is an agati, it's a bias, it's something that distorts the perceptions. But it's very easy to not acknowledge that fear has its place in nature. So not to get too lost in Pali grammar, but so greed, hatred, and delusion, these are called the unwholesome roots. So they always have a negative consequence if they are followed. Fear is recognized as a bias, but it's not intrinsically unwholesome. Again, I'm not trying to get too caught up in Pali grammar, but there is a very significant difference there. And so many years ago, when I was on a retreat in the forest at our monastery here in England, in West Sussex, Chidhurst Monastery, I was staying in the forest there, and I'd get up early in the morning and I'd go and sit at the edge of the forest and look out over the landscape. I'd sit on this a gate, it was a gateway at the edge of the forest, and look out over the fields. One morning I was sitting on this 5-bar gate, looking out over the field and watching the deer grazing early in the morning as the dawn was so lightening up the world. And then I think I coughed, and there was these 4 or 5 deer that were in the field. They poked their heads up, looked around anxiously, and bolted off. And I thought, oh, poor things, you know, how unfortunate. They were just enjoying having their morning breakfast, and now they're full of fear and they're running away. And so my mind went to this, oh, poor things, how unfortunate that they experience fear. And then it hit me like, duh, fear is how they stay alive. That's why they've got big eyes and, you know, big ears, so they can see and they can hear where danger might be. I mean, I was just a person coughing, but I could have been a person cocking a gun in that gateway, and could have had sort of malevolent, murderous thoughts towards them. So, and that was a seed of an insight into fear, and understanding that fear works by being uncomfortable. That's how it does its job. So I feel that it's important to understand that there's essentially, I'd say, 2 kinds of fear. And so when we think of dispelling the shadows of fear, not wanting to be afraid, we shouldn't reject that quality of fear altogether as something unwanted or unwholesome or bad, or that, oh, I wish I was never afraid. One of the things, if we reflect upon not just those deer in the field in Sussex, but also on our own ancestry as living beings, you know, even in the way sort of pre-human world, our forebears who were not afraid were the ones who died young because they climbed too high in that tree, or they didn't pay attention to that growling noise in the undergrowth. They did get too close to the cliff edge and they fell off. They got eaten. They injured themselves. They didn't look after that wound in their hand or their leg, and it got infected. So I would say there's a big difference between wise caution and then the neurotic fear or anxiety, and that if we reflect upon fear, and then we can see that it's like physical pain helps us to protect the body. Fear is one of the ways that we also protect ourselves, both physically and emotionally. So just like physical pain tells you you've damaged that part, that your hand is damaged, keep that thing clean, look after it, take care of that leg. you don't ignore that, because if you don't keep it clean, you don't tidy that up, it's going to get infected and problems will ensue. So that feeling of pain, like you're close to the fire, move back. That's telling you that the body is in danger, therefore move away. The body has been injured, do something about that. This joint is being strained, that the skin is broken, take care, watch out, don't ignore this. And so that just like physical pain, it works by being unpleasant. That's how it does its job. And again, our ancestors who didn't feel much pain or didn't look after their injuries, or they weren't paying attention to the stresses and strains on their system, they didn't survive, they didn't have offspring. And so we feel fear partially because of that is a powerful protective aspect of our psychology. So I feel it's really important for us to not vilify the process of fearing and think of it as something unwelcome or unwanted, because it's a protection, just like what we call our moral sensitivity, hiriotapa. That's a psychological pain. So if I tell a lie, or I'm rude to somebody in something that I say, or if I steal something, there's a pain in the heart. And that, from the Buddhist perspective, that painfulness is not a neurotic reaction. That's a reflection of our respectfulness for the property and the well-being of others, and our own honesty, our own integrity. So it works by being uncomfortable. That's how it does its job. So I feel that if we can distinguish that quality of wise caution and separate that out from sort of neurotic anxiety or self-centered anxiety, then it makes quite a different picture, because we can be cautious but without creating suffering within ourselves. We can be cautious and prudent in the things that we do, the things that we say, the way that we work, and we can do that without that being a limitation or without that being a stress to the heart, so that you're being thoughtful, you're paying attention, you're not being reckless, you're having plenty of rec, as it were, like the word reckon. It's like it comes from the word to know or to understand, that rather than being reckless and ignoring those those signals that we get, we're paying attention. So it's only when our the habit of fear is taken over by self-view, and then by the thinking mind proliferating around what might happen, or what I might lose, what's going to happen to my loved ones, what's going to happen to the country, what should I do, then it's the habits of thinking and the habits of seeing life, our own life and the life around us, in terms of self-view. That's the really kind of shadowy area, I would say, and that's where the majority of suffering comes from. That's what really obstructs our ability to act and to relate skillfully to our own situation, the situation around us, and hinders. It's a bias that hinders us from being able to act and speak in ways that are really effective and in tune with the needs of where we are, what we're doing, who we're with, and what might be helpful in the world around us. So I think that's a distinction I'd really like to make clear in this talk, and to recognize that if we are able to distinguish those two, then we're not switching off our quality of caution and our rec, as it were, R-E-C-K, that are being able to reckon what's the appropriate way to handle the situation. Then that fearfulness or that caution is a really beneficial quality. It's an aspect of mindfulness and wisdom, I would say. And rather than being something to be dispelled, it's something in a way to be rejoicing in, and to clarify that we can attend and attune most accurately to the time, the place, the situation. Also, another thing maybe to say about the theme that came to mind is, say, radiant mind overcoming the shadows of fear. So again, there's been, I would say, two kinds of fear. There's also two kinds of mental brightness or mental radiance, I would say. Again, this is not a definitive analysis of how things work, but so roughly speaking. So there's one particular teaching where the Buddha says there are four great radiances in the world: the radiance of the moon, of the sun, the radiance of fire, and the radiance of wisdom. And the greatest of these is the radiance of wisdom. So then, seeing something like that, then we might consider, okay, any kind of mental brightness is therefore a useful thing. That is something that is helpful, is beneficial, to be rejoiced in. But I would encourage caution, speaking of caution, because particularly if you are adept at meditation and you have, say, some accomplishment in concentration, then we can make just the inner mental brightness a refuge in and of itself. And so you might think, well, yeah, great, thank you. I'd like more brightness. That's a good thing. But the brightness that comes from concentration and just being able to focus on a positive quality is not really the radiance of wisdom, I would say. That's a different kind of brightness of mind. And I thought I'd share a story with you. Many years ago, when I was leading a 10-day retreat, maybe some of you are even on it. It's hard to keep track of all these hundreds of retreats and teaching occasions over the years. But anyway, on this particular retreat, I was teaching a method of combining loving kindness meditation with mindfulness of breathing. So I was using the breath, the inhalation and the exhalation, but focused on the heart center. And so like a combo of loving kindness meditation and mindfulness of breathing. That I'd heard Ajahn Sumedho had talked about that in the past, and I quite enjoyed it and found benefit from it as a method. But one of the people on the retreat, about the fourth or fifth day when I was doing the interviews, this person came into the interview room and said with a big smile on her face, "I'm really angry with you." And I thought, well, this is interesting. She's just told me she's angry with me, but she's got a big smile on her face. So I wonder what the story is here. I could tell there was a story coming. And so I said, well, why is that? She said, well, I've been meditating for many years, and I have developed a quite strong meditation practice. She said, my profession is I'm an administrator of a large psychiatric hospital. And even though my workplace is very challenging, and sometimes the medical staff and the administrators are far more challenging than the inmates of the hospital, it's a really tense and challenging environment. But I could come home after a day's work, sit down in my meditation space, just put my mind into this beautiful, bright space and just abide there. So she said it was rather like I had this beautiful attic with these skylights, and I could just sit up in my sort of glistening white attic with the sunlight coming through the skylights and just be totally at peace and at ease with things. And then she said, well, what's happened on this retreat with this kind of meditation that you've been leading is that I've been dragged out of my attic, and I'm now discovering that the kids have been making havoc with the rest of the house. Well, I've been up in the bright upper chambers. There's kind of chaos has ensued with the kids running riot down below, and so now I'm having to deal with the kind of mayhem that's been taking place in the rest of the house. So I'm angry with you. But she still had a big smile on her face. So that part of her was annoyed with that, but part of her was say appreciative of, well, I'm actually glad to know what was going on in the rest of the house. And it was a very interesting discussion, and I've mentioned this account many times over the years since, because I feel it was a really good example of this kind of inner brightness coming from concentration, and in a way the sort of the dark side of good samadhi. And so, and in the teachings that we have in the Southern tradition, there are say qualities that are named as as defilements or obstructions to meditation, called the vipassana upakilesa, the defilements of insight, and they include things like the mind being very concentrated, or the mind being very bright, the obasa, brightness of mind, as a defilement, so that it's a pleasant abiding place. But if the mind kind of stays there, it is, even though it's pleasant and it's bright and it doesn't seem to be unwholesome, it seems as though it's a very pure and lovely quality, just because of the way the mind is holding it and the way that it's using that to sort of ignore or suppress the other aspects of our being that are where things are really out of balance. But because of that brightness and that quality of integrity that comes from that brightness, that we're kind of, as this person put in her wonderful description, the kids have been causing mayhem in the house down below the brightly lit upper chambers of the attic. And so that so oftentimes when people look at that list of the defilements of meditation, thinking unrelenting mindfulness, unrelenting energy, brightness of mind, encompassing knowledge, you think, well, that all sounds pretty good. I'd like more of that, please. But it's because the mind is in a way taking refuge in those particular states. It's thereby, just like up in the attic, you're in the bright attic space, yes, and it's beautiful up there, but there's a kind of an ignorance of the remainder of the system, and so things are say sweet in some areas, but very bitter and out of balance in other areas. And so I feel that kind of brightness to overcome the shadows of fear. It's a kind of refined suppression, or what we would call vibhava tanha, the wiping out. So we're just getting away from our feelings of fear, anxiety, or resentment, or anger, agitation, just putting our attention to a bright, sort of comfortable place, and ignoring the other aspects that are going on. But because of our skill with meditation, that becomes a possibility. So I would say that's not a kind of radiance that's really going to be helpful. It might be pleasant and delightful to sort of just switch, in a way, turn the attention away from the challenges and difficulties of the world around us and what we're experiencing. But it's not a liberating brightness. It's not really the brightness of true wisdom. So the speaking of that, though, I would say that when the mind is really attuned to Dhamma, to the ultimate reality of things, there is indeed that same kind of there is a brightness, but it's a brightness that's really say a natural attribute of the citta, of the heart. It's not just a temporary state, but in a way it's an attribute of the mind's own nature. So there's a couple of very short discourses in the numerical discourses, the Anguttara Nikaya, that are very, very often quoted in the forest tradition in Thailand. And it's where the Buddha says the nature of the mind is radiant, and defilements only come along as visitors. Papasaramidang bhikkhave kandukehi kilesehi. So words to that effect. So that the mind is pabasara. Paba is light, so pabasara means of the nature of radiance. The citta's nature is radiant, and then kilesehi, the akandukehi kilesehi. Akanduka means a visitor, like a visiting monk coming to a monastery is an akanduka monk. So the defilements just come along and visit. And so this is a very, very common teaching within the forest tradition. I think probably in the Tibetan tradition as well. They say that just like the sun is there in the sky and the clouds come along and obscure it temporarily, but the clouds don't intrinsically obscure the nature of the sun. They just block it from the point of view of it, particular individuals here on Earth, but the sun is intrinsically bright, radiant, and so that it's not just a mental state coming from concentration, but rather it's a different kind of brightness, a different kind of radiance. So another of the very well-known teachings, and those of you who've listened to Ajahn Sumedho's Dhamma teachings over the years will have heard him quoting this particular passage, another Pali passage, where the Buddha defines the enlightened mind with a very particular kind of phrase, a unique phrase, where he says, the Pali is Vinyanang Anidasanang Anantang Sabato Pabang. And so that is describing the enlightened mind. It's a very unusual use of the word vijnana, which generally means a discriminative or separative consciousness. In this instance, it means an awakened awareness. So the awakened awareness, vijnanang, anidasana, which is non-manifest, which is invisible, which is say completely empty of features, ananta, limitless, infinite, sabato pabang, radiant in all directions, or also can mean accessible from every side. So, that in a way is a description of the fundamental nature of mind. And when that mind is clarified, when it's free of any kind of obscuration, when it's when the heart, the mind is awake, then it has these attributes of knowing, of limitlessness, of clarity, and of brightness. That's its fundamental nature, and emptiness, radiance, and awareness. And so that kind of radiance is reliable. that sabato pabang, radiant in all directions. So I would say when we're talking about overcoming the shadows of fear through the radiant mind, it's both the fear we're talking about is that kind of neurotic, self-centered, agitated quality of anxiety, and then the kind of radiance is the genuine radiance of the citta, the heart, and not just a kind of temporary abiding place. So then in terms of looking at how that genuine quality of wisdom can work to help us in these situations where we're feeling a lot of that anxiety, agitation, or feelings of helplessness, or why is this happening? Where's this coming from? What's the cause of this? How is this? How come this is happening to us? The mind can get really lost in that why, whying, not whining. Well, it can be whining, but whying. Like, where's this coming from? What's the cause of this? And that kind of anxious doubting can be extraordinarily debilitating and painful to live with it as a mental state. And so, so first of all, dealing with those qualities based, I would say, on moha, on delusion, that sense of trying to figure out where things come from, or why things are happening the way that they are. Where's this illness coming from? Why is this happening to us? Why is it? Why are we subject to this at this time? Also, the quality of fear itself. Sometimes it's the key thing to notice is how the mind is framing it, first of all, from a very self-centered perspective. And the Buddha's teaching offers us many ways of, in a sense, changing the view, changing the perspective, to go from a self-centered view, a view based around I and me and mine, and the habits of conceit and self-view, sakkaya ditthi, to a nature-centered view, or you can say a Dhamma-centered view. So there's numbers of reflections that the Buddha encourages to see how nature works. So one of them I thought I'd share is, and these are not particularly comforting, and so sometimes when people come across these teachings or hear them, they might sound as though the Buddha is being a bit brutal or uncompassionate or kind of hard-hearted. But essentially, the Buddha is coming from a place of realism. saying this is the way nature works. The fact that you're not seeing, you're seeing things in very personal terms is the cause of a lot of your anxiety, your agitation. So there's a very poignant, beautiful account where he meets together with King Pasenadi, and the Buddha and King Pasenadi, I think in Sanskrit, Prasanajit, but Pasenadi in Pali. They were both about 80 years old, and they were born at the same time, they're similar age. And then the Buddha has this conversation with King Pasenadi, and he says to him, "So, great king, if you were, if you were, say, here in your palace, and a messenger came from the north and said, 'Great king, there is this mountain range coming from the north and crushing everything before it.' And then before that messenger has finished what they're saying, then another one comes from the east and says, 'Great king, there's a mountain range approaching from the east, crushing everything before it.' Then another one comes from the south, saying, 'Great king, there's a huge mountain range approaching from the south, crushing everything before it.' And then, of course, a fourth one comes from the west and says, 'Great king, there's this huge mountain coming from the west, crushing everything and everybody before it.' If you had these four messengers coming to see you, great king, and they told you this, what would you do?" And then the king, King Pasenadi, says, "What else would there be to do except to say cultivate wholesome qualities and to practice the Dhamma? This is the only thing that's be worth doing. So to reflect on the teachings and to do whatever good actions I possibly could. What else would there be to do?" And the king says, "Very good, great king, well done." So if you want to look that up, it's in the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses, in the Kosala Samyutta, so section 3, sutra number 25. So if you want to look that up, the simile of the mountains. And the Buddha said, "Very good, great king, because aging and death are approaching and crushing everything before them. So what else is there to do except to practice the Dhamma and to do good deeds? And that's the place to put your attention." So in that respect, the king was very wise. Rather than, well, I launch my army and attack the mountain, take the mountains out one by one. He said, well, they're inexorably approaching from all sides. So get ready. This is what's happening. So that, again, the Buddha is not rejoicing in the fact that everything is being crushed in that simile, but rather, here it is, this is what's happening. So what can we do with our attitude towards that? Similarly, what we call the 5 subjects for frequent recollection. Again, when these are recounted, people can think, well, that's pretty depressing. Why would the Buddha want us to think in this way? But again, it's helping there to be a realistic and sort of nature-based attitude. So the 5 subjects for frequent recollection are: I'm of the nature to age, I'm of the nature to sicken, I'm of the nature to die. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. I'm the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, related to my karma, abides supported by my karma. Whatever karma I shall do, for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. So of those 5, 4, well, all of them are pretty challenging. And so to our ego that wants to have comfort and a long life, if not an indefinite life, and to never lose anything that we love, that's really challenging. So it's deliberately challenging to our habits of conceit and self-view, ego-centered thinking. But what the Buddha is doing is he's not rejoicing in the fact that we're going to be sort of intimidated or challenged by that, but rather say, look, like the approaching mountains. We have all aged since this Dhamma talk began, right? The arrow of time goes in one direction only. So that we are of the nature to age. Just on my screen, I've got 4 screens full of you. I won't count the number of grey hairs that we have between us, but there's quite a few. Quite a few grey hairs amongst us. So I'm of the nature to age, I'm of the nature to sicken. Will there ever be a time when they close the hospitals because nobody's ever getting ill anymore? I don't think so. and we're of the nature to die. Every human life, even the lives of the enlightened, the enlightened being like the Buddha, there came a day when the breath went out and didn't go back in again. Physical death is inescapable. And then all that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise. That which comes together necessarily comes apart. Things can't hold together permanently. We can't keep anything, whether we love it or don't. That's the way that nature works. And then the last one about karma and the results of karma. So that is a form of reflection where the Buddha is trying to help us change the view so that we can look around us and go, oh yeah, of course, that's how nature works. Just like it's springtime here in southern England. So already many of the daffodils have gone over. The beautiful sort of golden yellow blossoms of 2 or 3 weeks ago, they've now gone. And you have these green seed heads are there on the heads of the daffodils. The beautiful yellow flowers have gone. It's not a disaster. They've had their season. Their time is over. And now they're in their fruiting phase. That's what they do. The bluebells are in full blossom here in southern England. Those of you who ever witnessed the bluebells of England, they are in full blossom right now. But they will also, in a few weeks' time, they will have gone over too. The cherry tree outside in my garden its petals are sort of creating a skim of snow on the pond. The petals are blowing off. The cherry tree's blossoms, their season is coming to an end. That's what they do. That's where the cherries come from. If you had the flower on the tree permanently, you wouldn't get any cherries to eat. So look at how nature works. So when we see how nature works, then when we look in the mirror and see those wrinkles and that gray hair, rather than thinking, oh no, how can this be happening? Why me? It's like, instead, oh, of course, how could it not be this way? This is the way nature is. So that changing of the view, that changing of attitude, brings about a nature-centered perspective. So that is, undercutting that sort of the neurotic, agitated, self-based relationship to difficulty and sickness and pain and loss, and seeing, well, this is how nature works. That the pandemic is very injurious to the human family and incredibly destructive in many respects. But because we're part of a living system, a certain amount of it is under personal control, a certain amount of it is not. And that's how nature works. It always has worked that way. And I would suggest it always will work that way. So if we look around and see, this is not something that we like and we don't want it to be this way, but here it is, it's like this. And so even though it might be painful, the mind isn't adding a kind of wrongness to it. So, I mean, there's many dimensions to this, but I would suggest that even though you can say, well, if the politicians had made this decision instead of that decision, then it wouldn't have been this way. But even politicians' decisions are part of the organic system. Our own ability to address that and do something about it is also part of the organic system. But that's an issue I'll get onto in a minute. So the other thing I thought I would share with you in terms of developing a nature-centered view is a system of understanding, which is called the niyamas, N-I-Y-A-M-A, niyama. And niyama is the Pali word for law, or like a principle in nature. So when we think, we can easily think in terms of kind of a fatalistic pattern of thinking. Oh, this is because of the bad karma of the human race, or because of I did something in a past life that was really destructive. That's why my family got hit by the virus and somebody else's didn't. So we can think very much, and it's very common for us to think in those kind of superstitious or fatalistic ways. Because of this particular action, then this particular result has come about. And that can be, depending on your own conditioning and habits, that can be quite a rigid mode of thinking. So the niyamas, the 5 niyamas, I feel it's very helpful to understand this is a way of sort of reframing the the way that nature and our lives and the lives of people, of beings around us, is seen. So the 5 niyamas, the first one is Utuniyama. Utu literally means the weather. And this means essentially the laws of physics and chemistry. So the 5 niyamas, they spell out what is the fabric of our life and our experience in this moment. So I would, without having to be psychic, I would say all of us are experiencing the force of gravity. No one is tuning into this from the space station, I would assume. We're all experiencing the force of gravity. We experience that. None of us were involved in inventing gravity. The laws of physics and chemistry are not under personal control, but we experience their effects. The way light works, the speed of light. None of us were involved in deciding that. The weight of the electron, the nature of the photon. These are things that right now we're experiencing. Photons hitting our eyes and conditioning the living system, but that's totally non-personal. So we experience the effects of the laws of physics and chemistry. So that's niyama number 1, Utuniyama. Second one is Bijaniyama, which is the laws of biology. So when those photons hit the eyes, and then they trigger action potentials going down your optic nerves and into the visual cortex of the brain, and creating the effects that they do, that's all Bijaniyama. We didn't invent the human body. We didn't invent eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Those are all non-personal, the attributes of nature that we are absolutely connected to moment by moment and are affected by, but there's nothing whatsoever personal about that. We experience the effects of being a human, the human body, our digestive system, our respiration, the need to breathe, the need to eat, even our kind of social conditioning, functioning together as a group, or joined together for this Dhamma occasion. These are part of the Bijaniyama, the laws of biology. The third one is Kamaniyama, and this is where the personal comes in. That's the choices that we make, the actions, the deliberate chosen action. So that is where personal choice comes in. And so there is the laws of cause and effect in terms of action. This is the action, the karma, and here is the vipaka, the result of that action. So we experience, I chose to accept this invitation to give a talk. You chose to click on the link, and here we all are. And Dharma College chose to have a series of Dhamma talks for Visakha this year. So that's where Kamaniyama is, where those personal choices come in. Then the fourth one is Chittaniyama, how the mind works. Again, this is completely non-personal. You didn't invent the mechanisms of memory or perception or decision-making, how the mind chooses, how it multitasks, how you can both hear and see and think seemingly all at the same time. That's a non-personal processes. That's so how the mind works is Chittaniyama. And then the fifth one is Dhammaniyama. So that's the fundamental structure of reality, conditioned and unconditioned at its most primal level. And so again, that's completely non-personal. So in any one moment, all of us are experiencing the effects of those 5 niyamas, the physics and chemistry, biology, action and its results, the workings of the mind, and the fundamental nature of reality. All of us experience, consciously or unconsciously, those 5 streams all coming together. And that's what makes the fabric of this experience that we have. So when we sort of reframe the way that the mind knows the world and relates to the world on that kind of a format, then it radically changes the sense of what I'm experiencing is the direct result of something I either did in this life or in another life. And it broadens the picture. So birth and death is part of Bijaniyama. That's how the living system of the human realm works. There's a physical birth. Whether you know your parents or you don't know your parents, you were born. these bodies got born, and these bodies will last for a certain amount of time, and then they will disintegrate. That life will come to an end. That's not personal. That's biology. That's the way that the living system works. And so that when we change the view from a person-centered view to a nature-centered view, there's an easing of the heart. And so I would say that's another aspect of the way the brightness, the radiance of wisdom, that brightness of the heart, it frees the heart from those kind of agitations and distress and the stressing of that anxious fearfulness. And so when we see things from a nature-centered point of view, it enables a much greater quality of attunement, a genuine mindfulness and clear comprehension, mindfulness and wisdom, genuinely in tune with the reality that we are a part of, that is the fabric of our nature and the nature of all things around us. There may be going to the thinking processes and that agitation, anxiety, that one of the ways that we can again bring light of wisdom into the situation is to develop a mindfulness of our thinking processes. In modern day language, we call this cognitive therapy. The Buddha was sort of on the case a couple of 2,500 years ago with one of the most helpful teachings that the Buddha gives on this is Sutta number 19 in the middle length discourses. It's called the two kinds of thinking, Dveda Vittaka Sutta, two kinds of thinking. And he's describing his practice before he was enlightened. And he said that while he was practicing meditation, he would divide his thoughts into two categories. Thoughts, patterns of thinking that led to confusion, to harm, to division, thoughts based on greed, hatred, delusion, on cruelty, on selfishness. He put those into one category and saw that, okay, if those thoughts are followed, then they will, so whatever the mind frequently attends to, that will become the habit of the mind. So recognizing those are unwholesome, destructive, harmful patterns of thinking, okay, that's what they are. Let's make the effort to not follow those. And then patterns of thought that were beneficial, that were integrative, that were harmless, that were beneficial, then he put those in a different category. So these are the two kinds of thinking. And so that kind of patterns of thinking and attitude, then that is to be strengthened and supported. So this is a kind of cognitive therapy. It's like recognizing patterns of thinking that are destructive, that are harmful, recognizing that, knowing that, not out of aversion or fear, but realizing if the mind goes down that track, it's going to lead to a painful result. And so then recognizing that and training the mind, using the meditation to train the mind to let go of that. And then similarly recognizing the patterns of thinking that are beneficial, integrative, that are liberating, then to strengthen and to support that. So in terms of the pandemic and dealing with the uncertainties and the difficulties of the present situation, then recognizing how, particularly with patterns of thinking, that just because you think it, it doesn't mean it's true. Those of you from the Bay Area, you might have seen there was a very common bumper sticker. I think it was an Ashley Brilliant bumper sticker around the Bay Area one used to see from time to time. Just because you think it, it doesn't mean it's true. That's very wise. I would say it's completely in accordance with Buddha Dhamma. And maybe some of you got that on the back of your cars already. Just because you think it, it doesn't mean it's true. So that just being able to recognize a pattern of thoughts and saying, yeah, that's arisen in my mind. That's it. This is terrible. This is really awful. None of us are going to survive this. So, well, that's a pattern of thought. Who says it's true? It's a thought, but what's that based on? Do I have to believe that? And then with that kind of wise reflection, it can be seen, oh, it's a thought. Yes, it's arisen, it's passed away, but why should it be true? Why should that have any validity? And in that very moment, there's an easefulness in relationship to that. So, and then the other aspect of mindfulness of thinking is that, along with that our thoughts are not necessarily true, or in my assessment, about 5% of my thoughts are related, sort of reliably related to reality, and about 95% is just a sort of random associative thinking and creations of one kind or another. Also, the sense of ownership, that what we call our thoughts are not really ours, but rather like, I don't say those are my trees or my clouds or even my computer. You know, it's just somebody gave me this screen and here it is. You know, it sits on this desk. In a certain amount of time, it'll stop working. It'll go off and be somewhere else. But that sense of ownership of our thoughts is also very conditional. It's a convenient fiction to say these are my thoughts, my mind, and the development of insight meditation is a lot around puncturing that sense of ownership, that feeling of this is me, this is mine, this is what I am, and to recognize the patterns of thinking as genuinely and realistically ownerless. They're not who and what we are, but they're patterns of nature that take shape in this particular way. Here they are. So using our reflective abilities and using the meditation to recognize that our thoughts are not true and are not ours. And so that can radically change the way that we relate to our thinking. So the last thing I would say, I see that the clock has gone round to, it's now 3:02 here in England. So I'll just say that the last thing I'd like to share is in terms of the mind not just going towards fear or ignoring and shutting down and those sort of depressive states or anxious states, but going to aversion, blaming, as most of us are familiar with, blaming the government, blaming the authorities, blaming somebody, anybody, is very popular activity. But just getting, as the Buddha would often point out, hatred is never conquered by hatred. Hatred is only ever conquered by love. This is a law, ancient and inexhaustible. So putting more aversion and conflict and contention into the system is not going to help things. So in terms of action, I mean, doesn't mean peace doesn't mean passivity. Being easeful doesn't mean just switching off and disconnecting. And as I was mentioning earlier, our ability to speak up and do things is part of the way things are. So talking about peace is not being passive, or seeing the choices of government figures, whether it's here in the UK or the USA or in India. It's easy to blame powerful figures in the government who might have had their own less than enlightened motivations for making the choices that they did, mentioning their names. But doesn't mean to say that we don't do what we can to ameliorate the situation, to step up and help steer things in what we can see to be a more helpful, beneficial condition. So that compassionate action can arise from that quality of attunement. So that the light of wisdom, say, helping that to support that quality of awakened, aware attunement to the time, the place, the situation, then the natural result of that is compassionate action, but action that's stress-free, compassion that is not based on, I've got to do something, I've got to fix this, it's up to me. And that's stressful, agitated compassion, or that it's all going wrong, I should be doing more, people are dying, people are dying, and it's my fault because I'm not doing enough. But rather to let compassionate action come from a place of coolness and brightness. So we say what we can, we do what we can, but we're not taking it personally. Again, it's shifting from a self-centered perspective to a nature-centered perspective. So as I like to often quote, these are 3 principles for compassionate action, which is don't push. Just like a friend of ours who was a massage therapist used to use these principles. He had a school for bodywork in the Bay Area, and he used to use the principle, Don't push, just use the weight of your own body. Don't diagnose, just be aware. Don't try to help, but don't turn away. So these are, I think, are really very fine and helpful principles. So there's an engagement, there's a participation, but it's not coming from a sort of an anxious reactivity or a self-centered, say, compulsion, but rather it's arising naturally from the heart's attunement to the situation. And then when we can do something, we do it. When we can't do anything, we leave it alone. When it's time to speak, we speak. When it's time to be quiet, we're quiet. And when our action comes from that place, then rather than getting lost in blaming and getting contentious and angry with what we say take to be the causes of the situation, or contributing to the causes, so that you're in this way you're contributing to being a part of the solution rather than just complaining about the problem. So it's approaching the aspect of compassionate activity from a radically different place. So the person who formulated those three principles is a man called Kundanya, Barry Kapke, who was some of you will know from the Bay Area. He actually he was the person who founded Dharmanet, which was one of the very, very first Buddhist websites back in the early 90s. He was Mr. Dharmanet, as well as being a body massage therapist and an Abhayagiri lay minister as well. So I feel greatly indebted to his phrasing of those principles, because I feel that's a really reliable and helpful guidance for how to work with the pandemic and the challenges of what to do what can be done to help work with the situation. So I've spoken for about an hour now, and I offer these thoughts for consideration for everyone, and I'm happy to try and respond to people's questions. I see there's 11 items are coming to the chat box, but also I'll look upon Richard Dixie to be helping to process the questions that are coming in, if you'd be so kind.
Thank you, Bhante. Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much for your talk. It's very refreshing to hear such a rational approach being taken. It's very striking that you mention an evolutionary explanation for fear. And I wondered if you could comment a little bit on how you see the difference between evolutionary thinking and thinking relating to the Buddhist idea of liberation. Mm-hmm. Because of course a biologist would say, well, yes, you're quite right, the deer are afraid because they're going to get predated. They're just animals, that's what it is. You're just an animal too. So there's no liberation as such. This is merely a biological round that we're living in. And I'd be interested to hear how you square that in your own mind, in terms of how the idea of liberation works within an evolutionary perspective.
Thank you. That's a good question. I'm quite fond of evolutionary psychology, even though I know it's been used as an excuse for various kinds of very destructive and harmful positions and opinions. But the core of evolutionary psychology, as a scientist called Robert Wright, who wrote a book called The Moral Animal a number of years ago. And I felt it was very, very insightful, because I do feel a lot of what we experience, part of the Bijaniyama, is so our animal ancestry. But particularly to relate to your question, Richard, I feel that the potential for enlightenment is part of the evolutionary process, and that I know it's a bit dangerous to have a teleological approach, like, yes, we're all evolving towards that's what the direction that evolution is headed. But I would say that in my own experience, in my own life, I see this is the potential that we have as living beings, particularly as human beings, is that when our lives have say arrived at a level of integration of social stability, when the conditions are supportive enough that we have a food supply, we have a secure place to live, the living environment is not too precarious, then we have the capacity to turn the attention inward and consider the sort of primal questions of where do we come from, and what is this life, and what are we? What is this this living system, and this the mental and physical realm that we are a part of? So that I would say that the process of liberation is a part of the evolutionary principle. It's I wouldn't want to cast it as necessarily only in Buddhist terminology, but I see that very much as being in accord, and that what the evolutionary results in terms of how the human family will evolve into the future, I couldn't predict. But the just seeing how the more that people are genuinely able to awaken to their own life, their own mind, their own nature, then that leads towards a greater sense of compassion, a greater sense of respectfulness and responsibility. The more, again, I sort of go tenuously making assumptions about other religious articulations, but I would say the more spiritually mature that we are in a genuine level, then the more respectful we are of life, of people's property, of our relationships, of honesty. We part of that awakening process is a greater kind of humanitarian sense, and that so along with the quality of individual liberation, that I would say is what we are, what is a wholesome or a beneficial direction for our evolution, where it's going, if those skillful qualities are supported, then as a whole, as a human society, I would say it helps us to evolve towards a more compassionate and say a quality of understanding. There's the Steven Pinker's book, the Better Angels of Our Nature. Again, I know it's a bit contentious, or people say there are all kinds of holes that can be picked in that, but I feel that what he did, Steven Pinker wrote this book, and he sort of collates essentially how, if you look at how humanity operates, even though there are many conflicts, many wars, and a lot of strife and inequalities, the degree to which we are actually appreciative of each other, respectful of each other, and the amount of destruction that goes on between human groups is radically, say, reduced from the way it was even 100, 150 years ago. And that I would say that's part of our say, evolutionary process. The more that those wholesome, noble qualities are something that are actualized, then the more we can grow towards being a human family. Maybe the last thing to say on it, I'm not very good at short answers, but I would say the last thing that is kind of interesting that plays into this is that in Buddhist cosmology, to be part of the Manusa Loka, the human realm, it means you at least live by the 5 precepts, so that you can have a human body but not be living in the human realm if you don't live by the 5 precepts. So that's sort of the defining principle of the Manusa Loka, is that moral sensitivity. And so I feel that if we are evolving, I mean, things don't always evolve towards more peacefulness. It can evolve, things can evolve to sort of being a top predator, like a shark. You know, you get a good model of predation and you hold it for 190 million years, you know. So that but I would say in terms of what we what we are experiencing in the contemplative Buddhist world, or in other contemplative traditions, that aspect of our potential as human beings is being actualized, and then the good results of that can be seen around the world. I feel in a growing sense of say our shared humanity and a fundamental respectfulness that, you know, bodies like the United Nations, you know, 200 years ago, such a concept would be totally impossible. But now, not only is it possible, but there's quite a lot of energy behind that principle of everyone sharing a table together, and the poorest nations of Micronesia sitting down, at least in the same room, if not exactly the same table as the great powers of, say, China or the US or Russia or Britain or Germany and so on. So that sense of mutual respect, at least in principle, I take as a very good sign of our evolution. And then also, maybe the last thing to add into this, one of the well-known scientists, actually a physicist, John Archibald Wheeler, he was well known for making this diagram, a U-shaped diagram, saying how evolution has evolved to where humanity, where we can look back at our own origins. So the evolution of consciousness. So it's like a U with an I. So at one end of it. So it's like let me draw it. So if you can see this, so the evolution of consciousness, so that from the Big Bang, which is symbolized by here, then things have come together to the point where the universe can know its own nature, and so that I also take as part of our evolutionary process is evolving to reflect upon our own origins, and that described by John Wheeler, that's sort of part of what we are, the potential that we are evolving to is an awareness of where we've come from, what we are, and out of that, then a wholesome direction arises.
Thank you, Bhante. There's a related question to this, which is, how can we distinguish between good fear and bad fear? And I'm reminded of the Jataka tale where in a previous life, the Bodhisattva feeds his body to a hungry tiger.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if there's some reason for that strange, that comes up quite a lot, actually, that idea, as if somehow an animal's cautious fear has to be overcome by a bodhisattva. But anyway, the question is, how can we distinguish between the good and the bad fear?
I'd say mindfulness and wisdom, that in a way, knowing your own mind, and also training the mind and training the body. So one of the ways to work in this whole process is developing a strong body awareness, because often that anxious, agitated, harmful fear, or bad fear, it's reflected in a tensing in the body. And that, I speak as one who was a real worrywart, a kind of Olympic class fretter in my earlier years. I could be worried about anything and everything. Just if it exists, worry about it was my basic ethic. And so I found that developing a body awareness, whenever my mind was going towards anxiety, getting upset or agitated about anything, if I brought the attention into the body, then there's this tightness in the belly, or a kind of a restriction in the chest or the throat. And so then bringing the body into full awareness, and then knowing those tensing habits, and then relaxing your stomach, relaxing your chest, your throat, then there's still the situation that needs to be dealt with, but there's a responsive rather than a reactive way of working with it. So using the body and the body sensations as a measure is a really excellent and reliable entry point for that. So that if you bring attention into the body and then there isn't that kind of a stressful tensing, then that is a sign that that there's a caution or an alertness, but it's not anything that's producing any kind of say anything harmful. And similarly, developing a mindfulness of your own thought processes, what is the mind adding on to this? Okay, this is there's an alertness, there's a sense of, oh, what's going on here? Is the mind able to just be awake and attuned, or is it adding a whole lot of stories and proliferation and sort of predictive horrors, challenges that haven't happened yet? What's the thinking mind doing with it? And so that but I find particularly for us who are very thought-based people, using the body as the first center of reference, and then training the body to relax and to be at ease, that's the most helpful way of establishing that wholesome fear or caution, wise caution, and not letting it drift into that harmful fear, or destructive and obstructive fear.
Thank you, Bhante. Could we now turn to talk about radiance? There's a question here. This teaching on the radiant mind seems related to your teachings on the one who knows beyond the five aggregates. Mm-hmm. Is there also the one who acts? If we can learn to rest in pure awareness, can our actions or decisions ever arise from a similar pure state?
Short answer, yes. And it's also that the expression "the one who knows," it's a bit of a kind of a compromise way of speaking, because it can give the impression there's a little homunculus, a little sort of a mini me that's inside, that's pulling the strings and acting from like in that movie Inside Out. Inside Riley's head, you have the five little characters pulling Riley's, pushing the buttons for young Riley, which I thought was a very inspired movie, to be as an aside. But rather than having these little characters, and the one who knows as being the sort of the character that should be in charge, it's in a way it's more helpful to think of the element of knowing, so that the vijja dhatu, the knowing element, is a Pali term I use sometimes for that. Vijja being awareness, avijja ignorance, so dhatu meaning the element. So the vijja dhatu, the element of knowing, or the element of awareness, which helps it to be seen in a less personalized or less sort of in a person kind of a way. So similarly, there will be that that root of action is coming from that same quality of attuned awareness, so that there's the element of knowing, and then that knowing informs action. One of the ways I like to talk about it is that, and those of you who've been on retreats with me may be familiar with this, I like to talk about this process in terms of a self-adjusting universe, so that when so part one is letting go of the proliferations of mind and attuning the attention fully to the time, the place, the situation. So there's a mindfulness and full awareness, or mindfulness and wisdom. So then from that attunement, then action arises, so that is a natural result of that attunement. So rather than sort of noticing, oh, I'm slumped over, I should sit up straight, if you bring awareness to the body, and there's the awareness of the spine being slumped, if the awareness is just held on that slumped feeling, then the body will straighten on its own, without me, the managing director, stepping in to do anything. It's a self-adjusting system, but the power source of the system is awareness. And so that it's not a perfect way of talking about it, but in response to this question, rather than the one who acts, I say that attuned action arises as a result of that, say, attuned awareness, and that being around a great teacher, someone like Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Sumedho, one of the reasons why they're really unpredictable, you never know what they're going to say or do next, is that they're coming from that attuned place. They don't know what's coming next either, because they're in this sort of hyper responsive mode. They're attuned to who's with them, and if they know that then if cracking a joke is the appropriate thing, then they crack a joke. If being quiet and somber is appropriate, then that's what happens. So there's this natural responsivity that's coming from the attunement, rather than, oh, it's time to crack a joke. What joke shall I tell? It's like there isn't that kind of managerial mode in there, but rather it's as in the question. Ideally, when there is that say profound attunement of the heart to the way things are in the present, then just like the words that are arising now, that rather than having a sort of prepared script, they're just based upon what has been asked and what I've already said, then the words that arrange themselves are coming from, hopefully, that attunement to the time, the place, and the situation. And so then it's a very easeful way to operate, because it's not based upon success or failure, having an agenda, but there's a profound adaptability to situations that comes from that.
Thank you. And there's one other question, Bhante, on Radiance. This wonderful quote, Vijanam Anidasna Anantam Sabatopapam. That quote uses Vijana, not Manas or Chitta. It's unusual to hear Vijana being used as radiant. And I know sometimes people say the three words mean the same thing, but I find that a little bit unsatisfactory. Could you comment on the difference between Chitta, Manas, and Vijana in the tradition, particularly in reference to radiance here?
Yeah, this is an ancient question. I think a few PhDs have been written, and doctoral and theses even before PhDs existed, that it Mano, Chitta, and Vijnana. But particularly, one of the interesting things about this statement is you find it in two different places in the Pali Canon. One's in the Kevada Sutta in the long discourses, the Digha Nikaya, and one is in the invitation to a Brahma in the Sutta 49 in the Majjhima Nikaya. And so both of those statements are used in relationship to a Brahma god. And so, and it's a very particular and unusual use of the word vijnana. So what you find sometimes in the Pali Canon is the Buddha is using particular phraseology because of who he's talking to, or because of the situation. So like when the Buddha speaks to Bahia, the Bahia Sutta, and he talks about in the seen there is only the seen, in the heard there is only the heard, in the sense there is only the sense. That one interesting thing with that is that that's related closely to the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, and which is a sutra from the Upanishads, which was particularly important to the bark-clad ascetics. And Bahia was a bark-clad ascetic. So the Buddha chooses the phraseology because, here is a bark-wearing wanderer. So I'll use the kind of language that he knows about to teach him. And so there's a few other places where the Buddha is doing that, both with royals, talking about armies, or the structure of a chariot, or a cat, talking to a cowherd about looking after a herd of cattle. So when I was living with Ajahn Pasano at Abhayagiri Monastery, and we were talking about this when we were putting together that book, The Island, we were discussing this, and he said, I think this is probably related to some kind of Brahminical statement. And the use of the word vijnana is the Buddha's riffing on a theme from a Brahminical text. And I've been putting this out into the world for the last 15 years or so, seeing if there's any kind of Upanishadic or Vedic scholars who say, yes, I know where that comes from. No one's come up with it yet, but it really fits that kind of unique usage of the word vijnana, because it's only in these two suttas is the word vijnana used as a sort of liberated, awakened awareness, rather than a separative, discriminative sense consciousness. It's the only places, and both of them involve a Brahma god. So that there's this clue, so that there's say the Buddha is using the word vijnana in an unusual way, but quite deliberately. That's my take on it. And so that almost always the word vijnana is means separate or partial in this sense, that or divided, and then jnana is knowledge. So it's the knowledge of distinguishing one thing from another, separating this from that, so that is normally the use of the word vijnana. So when we talk about it in the five khandhas, the five skandhas, as the fifth of the five skandhas, it's very much that discriminative consciousness, that element which can discern one thing from another thing. But this is a very unusual usage, and so that it needs to be seen in context with that. So I hope that spells that out a little bit for you. And the mano is the thinking sense. So as the eye perceives light, the ear perceives sound, the nose perceives odors, and the tongue perceives flavors, the body perceives sensations. Mano represents the kind of the mind organ, as it were, and it perceives Dhamma with a small d, mental activity. So that's the mano, the mind sense organ, as it were, is quite a sort of neutral and sort of non-liberated quality in and of itself. It's like the eye is a receptive organ. So that aspect of mind is the mind as a perceptive organ, and but it is also named as being unique amongst the six senses, as the eye doesn't produce light, it perceives it, but mano both perceives thought and emotion and so on, and it also perceives it, so it kind of generates that which it also perceives. So it is in a bit of a different category, and it's also recognized as that sense which coordinates the other five senses. So it kind of sits in its own special niche. And then citta is the aspect of the mental realm which can be liberated. So usually mano and vijnana are not, don't represent liberated qualities, but the citta is that aspect of mind which contains the transcendent attributes, and that is the aspect of mind which can be liberated. So when a description of someone realizing arahatship is made, then it says that the citta was liberated, or that their heart was liberated. And that's the terminology that's most often used. As I said, there's numerous PhDs and scholarly authoritative books have been written about mano, citta, and vijnana, but that's the short version.
Thank you, Bhante.
Version.
That's very helpful, actually. It's wonderful. There's a question here about fear. Someone's come back on fear. I feel there's no good or bad fear. Fear is a defilement. Good fear comes out of compassion and responsibility. Bhante, can you clarify, please? There is nothing like good fear. Fear is always undesirable.
Well, when you're standing on the pavement or the sidewalk, and you're waiting for a break in the traffic to choose a moment to cross the road, I would describe that kind of caution as good fear. It's uncomfortable, but it's like saying there's no good pain. It's like, well, no pain. It's a very rare physical condition to experience no pain, no physical pain. But my understanding is that those who are born with that condition, they very rarely live past their mid-20s, because their bodies have suffered so many injuries and infections that haven't been tended to, is that they rarely make it to the age of 30. By 20 or 25, they die of the effects of not looking after their injuries and infections and so forth. So pain works by being unpleasant. And similarly, fear works, it does its job by being unpleasant. So again, going back to evolutionary psychology, that's what we experience fear because it works. It has its place in nature. Like the ego, we have an ego. It's the ego isn't a brain infection. It's not a psychological problem. It's a useful psychological structure, but it becomes problematic when it claims rulership, over the universe, kind of a sort of an undeserved omnipotence, if you like. That the ego says, I'm in charge, everything is up to me. I'm the most important person here. It's ridiculous. But the ego, as a psychological structure, has evolved to enable us to live together in a human group, particularly as a living social group with a lot of ability to think and to remember and to predict, to imagine. So our egos are a handy psychological structure that enables us to get along with each other, work with each other. When that useful psychological sense of I and mine overspills its boundaries and sort of drifts into this sort of weird omnipotence delusion, then the results are very sort of are very destructive, and they kind of all the problems of egotism, self-centeredness, and conflicts, and then easily arise from that. But in and of itself, then it's not problematic. Ajahn Thanissaro, he was a Buddhist monk that you might have heard the name of. One of his pieces that he's written is called, which is kind of unusual for a Theravadan Buddhist, is called "In Praise of Ego," and so it's recognizing that sense of I-ness can be useful, but it's when it takes on a false absoluteness, then and assumes a false omnipotence, then their trouble ensues, difficulty ensues, and it becomes a base for that. So I would say, I don't wish to argue, but with a person, but they have their own experience. But I would say what I mean by a good fear is that, it's that which stops you from stepping out into the road. Like the majority, the main cause of death of males, certainly in the Western world, between the ages of 17 and 35 is recklessness. Thus have I heard, that's what kills most young males between 17 and 35, is climbing higher than you really can in the tree, showing off to your mates, piling into a car on a Friday night, and assuming that you're invulnerable and omnipotent, and then you crash and burn. And so there's reasons why in young males that reckless quality is there, but I would say that that sense of caution is valuable, and again, sort of for the fourth or fifth time, it works by being unpleasant. Not everything that's useful is pleasant, like going to the dentist. I mean, how many people say, "Oh, great, I'll book I'm sorry if there's any dentists here. I'm not trying to be abusive or dismissive to the dentistry industry, but how many people book a trip to the dentist for the pleasure of it? No, we go because our teeth need to be looked after. That's why we go to the dentist. It's not, it's not going to be pleasant, but it's useful. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. QED.
There's a follow question here. Can good fear be samasati?
Well, I would say there can be, samasati means or right mindfulness. I can say there can be, the mind can be fully aware of that fearful feeling. And so you can be, it's like standing by the road, waiting for a break in the traffic and calculating the time to cross. That can be, you can be fully mindful and aware of that, knowing there is a need to cross the road. This is a legal place to cross, but the traffic doesn't seem to be pausing. So I better pay close attention, do my internal calculations of how fast the traffic is approaching, and then make my choice when to cross. So I would say, yes, that sense of alert, cautiousness, attentiveness, and not wanting to be injured, not wanting to ruin somebody else's day by, having you stepping in front of their car, because it's not just for you, but it's for the the people driving as well. You don't want to make their life difficult or traumatize them. But you are, I would say that there can be full mindfulness and awareness of that fearful feeling, that kind of anxious or alert feeling. Yeah, I know that, okay, so but Ajahn, bhaya is one of the agati. Fear is a bias. But I would just say, consider what I've been saying about that. If you're standing on the edge of a cliff and the wind starts blowing, taking a couple of steps back from the edge because oh, I nearly got knocked off my feet there. That that can be something that one is fully mindful of. Oh, the wind came up. I'm standing close to the edge. I just experienced my body being pushed this way and that. Who knows where the next blast of wind is going to come from? If I don't step back, I could easily get knocked off the edge of the cliff. Therefore, take a step back. That's, I would say, wise caution. And there doesn't have to be anything kind of unpleasant about that. I'm telling a story about this when Jack Cornfield recounts that when he was a monk with Ajahn Chah, and he was going to visit a little branch monastery where the main monastery is in Ubon province, is very, very flat. The whole area for hundreds of miles is very, very flat. But there was a branch monastery down near the Cambodian border in the hills that divide Cambodia and northeast Thailand. So Ajahn Chah was going down to visit this branch monastery, and it seemed that the person who was driving the pickup truck was had some kind of a death wish, and so that he was the driver was herring around these little hillside roads without slowing down for the corners, crossing on the wrong side of the road, and so on and so forth. And so Jack tells the story of how he was sitting there next to Ajahn Chah in the front of this pickup, thinking, "We're going to die, we're going to die, we're going to die, we're going to die," and he looked over at Ajahn Chah to see if he was showing any kind of anxiety. He said his face was very implacable, but his knuckles were white. And then they got to the end, they finally got through the hilly patch and got to the branch monastery, and Ajahn Chah just turned to him and said, "Scary ride, huh?" Yeah, so and Ajahn Chah had the reputation of being an enlightened being, so he could be fully aware of, like, well, this is exciting, but not making a problem out of it. That's how I would read the situation.
Thank you so much.